All right. Well, let me see how to figure out how to make you the person that can share your screen. There you go. Ashley, thank you.
Got
You
it.
got it. You got it all on your own. Perfect. So with that, what we can probably do is go ahead and get started. It's already 1:02. If we have a couple more people join us, we can of course let them in to the room and into the conversation. So thank you all for joining us. This is a moment we've been waiting to get to, so it's really exciting. The goal for today's meeting is to kind of pass this process off to Ashley, who will introduce herself. She'll go over our process and some ideas for our strategic planning process, and towards the end facilitate a question answering session for any questions that we have. And the goal here is that I'll help with setting up some of the introductions at the very beginning, and then we'll go from there. But Ashley, is there anything you wanted to add to that brief introduction for today's meeting before we get into introducing who everyone is?
No, I don't think so, Tanner. I'll go through this in a little more detail after the introductions too.
Perfect. So if you go, I think there was a slide for perfect. So we might actually, I was thinking about this, if we can do this in reverse order, we'll let the steering committee members introduce themselves to you. And then Renee will do her introduction for how she came about looking at the collaborative and how Cadmus Group and Ashley became involved. So with that, what I think would be best for Ashley, this is kind of an opportunity for her just to get to know some of us, is if you can say your name, the organization you work for, and we've kind of talked about this as a group, and Ashley's seen the slides, but if you can give her just a 10-second top level, what's the big thing you hope the collaborative accomplishes with this strategic planning process? That would be greatly appreciated. And the way I'll do this is I'll just call people out based off of your faces that I see on the screen. So Georgia, you're on the top left. If you can do your name, organization, and what you hope to get out of this process.
Okay, this is Georgia Jepson, and I'm on the Education and Outreach Subcommittee, and I'm with the Land Trust of the Eastern Panhandle. And with the strategic planning, one of my big goals is really to have the partners be able to work together for some short-term and long-term planning where we have some real concrete goals and objectives that are measurable, that are really based on us being able to plan together with some outside unbiased facilitators helping to guide us. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. The next person in line there would be Monica.
Hi, Monica White with State of West Virginia Source Water Protection Unit. And what I'd hope to get out of here, out of this this group, is to hopefully contribute anything I can in terms of source water protection information. Maybe, get together with the groups and, like I said, contribute whatever information I can that might be helpful and that would help other members, other stakeholders to maybe, help their partnerships to implement practices that would be beneficial to the entire community.
Thanks, Monica. And Barbara?
Hi, I'm the Harpers Ferry Town Council member, and I'm a liaison to the Harpers Ferry Water Commission, and we oversee the Harpers Ferry Waterworks utility, and we have a very strong interest in leveraging resources to protect our drinking water, which is the Elks Run stream, and particularly what goes on in the zone of critical concern as the Elks Run winds its way through the county to our intake. So what happens upstream is very important to our waterworks utility.
Thanks, Barbara. Mark?
I'm Mark Chavone. I run the Farmland Protection Program for Berkeley County. I'm also the chairman of the Conservation Working Group. There have been some great comments about the strategic plan process. I'd like to end up with a great usable roadmap. It gives us kind of clear guidance as to where we need to be in the future. And any effort to strengthen the interactions between the various groups would be a very useful thing too.
Thank you. Angie?
There we go. Hi, I'm Angie Rosser. I'm the Executive Director with West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and I am very pleased that we find ourselves embarking on this strategic planning process. My goal would be just to really see this collaborative solidify itself for the long haul. And at the same time, as been mentioned, like set some benchmarks for interim progress and success, and for everyone to just, you know, see their roles in implementing the strategic plan and making this thing really take hold and be the model for the rest of the nation. How about that?
All right. David, I see you there next.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see your faces. Nice to meet you, Ashley and Renee. My name is David Lillard. I am on the steering committee. I'm a volunteer with Elks Run Watershed, and I'm on the board of directors with the Land Trust of the Eastern Panhandle. I like the roadmap analogy that Mark used. I'd like to see us have an idea of where we want to be in some specificity in the long term, and then following up on Angie's, you know, what are those interim things that we can get to, and of course the strategies to get there.
Thank you. And the last one here, not least, Maya.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Maya Welsh. I am the program director with West Virginia Rivers Coalition. And I am really excited that we're having this meeting. It's something that, you know, being able to embark on strategic planning is something that we'd hoped for, but didn't think we'd realize so fast. And so I'm really, really pleased. And what I'd like to see is just in general, the collaborative grow into a place where it creates its own path forward, where relationships grow and it becomes an entity that stands firmly on its own legs. But I also more practically would love to see measures of success and sort of a couple of general metrics that we can reflect back on 2-3 years from now, so that we know whether we're meeting our conceptualization of what success might look like.
Thank you, Maya. So that's our steering committee members. Again, there'll be a few additional members that aren't on the call today, but that we'll share this with, that Ashley and Renee will get to know as we go along. Renee, would you like to then take it from there about maybe quickly how you heard about the collaborative and how you came about with your division looking to support our work?
Sure. So, hi everybody, my name is Renee Bryant. Some of you may have seen me on some of the other work groups in the past, as I try to be a silent partner unless I can't help myself. I have been with the agency for 18 years. I definitely have background in water in general, but this is my first foray into source water. So I've been trying to learn as I go along. I am the team lead of our source water program in Region 3 in Philadelphia. We have 3 full-time employees for that. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on as being the lead was providing opportunities to our collaboratives. And so I listened in on the first conversation when Michelle Audie presented to you on creating a strategic plan and all the steps and all that other fun stuff. And what became pretty darn obvious pretty quickly is that you're very thoughtful, you're very organized, you're very responsive, and I think you have excellent opportunities here to not only continue on the path that you're on, but to thrive and embrace additional opportunities that are definitely headed your way. Mostly because of being in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which allows you additional funding that other collaboratives don't always have the opportunity to, but mostly because of your insight, your contributions, and the clear way that you all communicate and interact. So because of that, we made a pitch to our division on behalf of Source Water to provide funding to you all with the concept of the strategic plan, with Tanner's help, of course. And we not only received the amount of money we asked for, we received more. So we were allocated $60,000 to bring on a facilitator for you to utilize in both the facilitation and the authoring of that strategic plan. So the good news is that you have Ashley, who is phenomenal, and she is fantastic, and I think you'll really enjoy her, and I think she will really love working with you all. The better news is that you also have me as a note taker or someone else who can definitely help provide a sounding board on how some of the other collaboratives are working, what some of the other ideas that they have, or I'm just there to kind of like silently help to diffuse some of the hours that Ashley might take on, and make sure we spend all of her hours wisely on things that are most important to the collaborative. So trying to take some of that administrivia away. The not so good news is that this contract ends June 30th. So Ashley turns into a pumpkin by June 30th. So you as a collaborative have, I would say, around 9 months to really put a draft final plan together, with some wiggle room at the end, of course, for vetting to the steering committee that Ashley will talk to you all about, finalization, making sure that it's where you want it to be at this particular time. So you have, but I am willing to help, a bit of work to do. But I think that you all, including the work groups, are fully capable of making this happen. So Ashley's going to take it from here. As I said, I will continue to communicate only because I'm the work assignment manager for her since EPA holds that contract. But any way that I can help, I am more than happy to do so. But otherwise, really excited about this, excited that we were able to contribute in a timely fashion to something that was needed for your collaborative. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Ashley.
Great. Thanks, Renee. And thanks, Tanner, and everyone for this background and introductions. As we get up to speed on all of the great work that you're already doing, the structures you have, the work groups, the steering committee role, it's just great to have that one-on-one information too about what each of you would like to see out of this process. I'm Ashley Reyes. I work for the Cadmus Group. We're a contractor to EPA and provide a lot of support in the headquarters office and the regional offices around drinking water and source water protection and underground injection control, some wastewater projects, and then clean water projects that are typically more watershed planning based. So I've been working in the space for about 10 years, and most recently, for the past 3 years or so, have been providing a lot of support to source water protection projects, strategic planning in the environment, drinking water, clean water, and renewable energy spaces, and facilitating projects and programs and processes like this to make sure that the products that we're developing together are specifically tailored to the way that you all currently conduct business or want to conduct business, and to get you to those goals. So sort of backtracking from the long-term current high-level goals that you might have to figure out how we get from there to a specific annual action plans that address objectives that each work group has, or that get down to a certain level of specificity where you can start developing those measures and metrics that a few of you mentioned wanting to see out of this planning process. And I'm joined by Jacqueline Sherry today, who's one of the analysts on our team. We have a few other folks that will probably jump in on strategic planning development, but I think for the most part, in terms of working with us, you'll probably be mostly working with myself and maybe a little bit with Jacqueline, who has a lot of experience in public engagement and stakeholder engagement in that diversity, equity, and inclusion lens that I know is core to your values as a collaborative.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline. Like Ashley said, I'll be providing support also from the Cadmus group, and I'm excited to support you on this planning effort.
Thanks, Jacqueline. All right. Are there any questions before we get started? Anything anyone wants to add that came to mind after introductions?
Ashley, the only thing I wanted to add is it's a quick note on the agenda under welcome and introductions, but the two things I think we would want to highlight is just in general, in addition to who we are as individuals, is who we are as a body, as a steering committee that will be kind of keeping track of the process as we go, and seeking through the body, through the steering committee, input throughout the process. And then of course, we would be the body that would be responsible for approving the final plan and the individual components as they come about. So want to make sure everyone's clear that that's our role as a steering committee. And then also our role for West Virginia Rivers Coalition as the host partner. There'll be some planning meetings as we go along where we'll meet with Ashley or Renee or Jacqueline, whoever it would be, to keep kind of the administrative portion of the project moving forward. And we'll be transparent and open with the steering committee as we move forward about those meetings. For example, we met with Ashley and Renee to kind of plan out what the content of today's meeting would be. And we anticipate having similar meetings like that moving forward, just as a way to keep the process going without burdening everyone with all of the kind of minute details that go into planning these meetings, et cetera. So in the process, that's one of the roles we'll play. And for the steering committee, we'll make all of those notes clear. And also just, so I want to make sure we have just a quick moment if anyone has any questions or seeks clarity on the role of West Virginia Rivers as the host partner to help kind of administer the process and help Ashley and Renee move things along, or has any questions on the role of the steering committee in the process. Okay, very good. All right, well, perfect. So that would be passing it back, Ashley, to you for the majority of the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tanner. I think that's what you just brought up is a good segue into a question that we had about how the steering committee wants to receive that information. So is it everyone is tight on time, is getting information about updates for how the process is going, these discussions that we're having in email format, a monthly kind of status update, since this group only meets twice a year.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that? How you all as a group would like to receive kind of updates as we go? We kind of have planned, in September and March of every year is a time for all of us, the steering committee, as well as all of our partners to get together. How do you all see is best to use your time to keep you engaged with this process as we move forward? Do you have any insights into that? Or do we want to kind of let that question kind of percolate and think about it?
And maybe we should come back to that at the end, because I expect we'll be talking about how participation and communication is going to happen holistically through this process. Is that right, Ashley?
We'll talk a little bit about that. I think we'll get into that more in the fuller group meeting in September. More specifics. We'll be focusing more today on sort of just
Okay.
an assessment of where we are, where we're going, and our options for what we would like to present to the rest of the group in September. But I think there will be, I think, Andrew, you make a good point. There will be questions, things that come up that may make it clear based on the things that the steps that we have to take in the process, when points of communication will sort of organically come up for this group too. So then moving forward, to go very quickly through goals for today's meeting. Tanner touched on this a little in his kickoff. We're going to do a quick review and refresher, just a few minutes per slide, to talk through the strategic planning process, and that'll be related to the slideshow and the steps that Michelle Oddie presented to all of you at your last meeting in February. We'll talk about the mission and vision that the collaborative currently has, which is kind of our starting point or framework to build off of for the strategic planning, and then the current long-term goals. And those won't be, those aren't considered set in stone at this point, but it's just so that we all have that information at the front of our minds as we start thinking about the best approach for a strategic plan, the best format for that plan. And I know there have also been a few surveys around skills and the planning process, so we've taken some of that high-level information as well, and we'll talk through that, considering where we are now, where we could be with changes in demographics or population, climate as we move forward. So those are really the first kind of two steps in the planning process for strategic planning. And then the bulk of our discussion today will be around which type of strategic plan approach and format works best based on how you're currently conducting work and how you'd like to continue working, what's been successful, and what opportunities for improvement there might be. So quickly, this is the strategic planning process. I think this is the same graphic that Michelle shared in February, so it should look somewhat familiar. Basically, we have 6 steps in the process, and this is the approach that we'll be using, where we're going to assess where we are now, where we could be, where we want to go, how we're going to get there, and then the evaluation metrics and assessment points, so that it can be a continuously improving process. And I think previously around strategic planning, some ideas came up from this group and the collaborative at large to have a rolling 5-year plan, or something where we're looking at those specific metrics on a year-to-year basis, but also considering how the collaborative is evolving over the 5-year plan, if that is the timeline that we end up going with, and whether there are opportunities to reassess, develop a new 5-year plan when we're 3 years in, or take another look at how, against the measures and metrics that we set, how things have been going, so that we can make tweaks to either move more quickly, focus on new priorities, things like that. I thought it would just be helpful to put a few key elements of the collaborative's kind of foundation and backbone in here. So this is our mission, value, purpose. The mission being protecting drinking water through land conservation, your vision, a vibrant network collaborating on land conservation and stewardship practices to protect safe, clean drinking water for communities in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. And then also highlighting this commitment to diversity that's in a lot of the materials that you have right now on the website. So making sure that we're keeping that diversity, equity, inclusion lens, which we do on a lot of these sort of strategic planning projects, where that's a key element, making sure that we're taking that lens and developing action plans that not only address potential barriers to inclusion and diversity, but actually put those barriers at the center of some of our plans, so that we can plan around communities, populations, stakeholders that may have been underrepresented in the past, or that we want to make sure can be not only included but feel ownership on these efforts as well. the current long-term goals right now, and these were just pulled out of the current 5-year or the current strategic plan from 2017, and the operational guide that was finalized earlier this year are up on the screen. This is where we'll start from, but by no means does this need to be where we stop, or do we need to accept these long-term goals as part of the process the way that they are. They can be added to, revised, but these are the current long-term goals, and that are spread sort of across all of the work that's currently going on. So they're not work group specific necessarily, although there are certain work groups that would lean more towards addressing one goal over the other, but they are for the collaborative at large. So this is where I want to open it up a little more to you all, get a feel for how work is currently planned and completed, what's working well, and where opportunities could be. So for where we are now, Tanner covered a little bit on roles and the role of the steering committee to provide support and vision and guidance that you all provide in this process, and to the collaborative at large. The role of West Virginia Rivers with being the host partner and providing overall coordination. And then we have the 3 work groups, the conservation, education, outreach, and stewardship or best management practices. And so my understanding is that a lot of the work is completed by the work groups, but I'd love to get any additional insights from you all about how the work is currently planned and completed, and based on how the work is currently getting done, including planning and actual implementation, completion of the work, and tracking progress. What within that process is working well, and where might there be some opportunities for improvement? Maybe we could hear from, I know a couple of the work group chairs are on, so maybe we could hear from you on how the work within that particular work group gets planned, like how do the ideas come up? How is the work divided up between members? Is all of the work primarily done within a work group, or is there collaboration? And if there is between work groups, what's that process like?
Actually, this is Georgia with the education and outreach. And I think one of the issues that we face is many of our members are really, really busy. So a lot of the work tends to land in Tanner's lap as the working staff. And we all participate at different levels. But I think Tanner holds us together like his amazing glue, and does a phenomenal job in keeping us together and keeping us facilitated, and going in the right direction, and keeping us moving. But we don't always have our full scope of all of our members participating, just because they are all very, very busy and don't always have the ability and the time to participate as much as they would like. And they have great skill sets and great ideas, but not always the time to provide the input so that we can stay on schedule and make the progress that we know we need to make to just keep moving. So that's that's a common thing with committees.
Right.
Great people, great ideas, great scope of partners, but they can't always participate the way that they would like. So, it is what it is, but we have the
really able to move forward because of Tanner's great facilitation and guidance for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. And great job, Tanner. So far, it is something that we see a lot, especially with committees that have more executive level, leadership level people on the committees, which is many executive committees and many advisory committees even. It's harder to get people involved who have the time to do the work. So you have a lot of great ideas and sometimes lack the ability to actually implement some of those ideas with the teams that you have. So it's something really good for us to know going into this process too, and what's realistic and feasible for the team as it is, or if there's an opportunity to expand the team and bring in more volunteers or other people who would be able to do more of that boots on the ground implementation of the work.
So actually, this is Mark Chavone. On the conservation work group side, I would mirror a lot of the comments that Georgia made. We had a couple of initial face meetings a year and a half ago where there was a lot of participation. Again, a lot of us are executives. We're running our own county or state level conservation programs, which at least at that level you need for the purpose of that particular working group to be able to assess what conservation values were going to be significant to the goals of this project.
Mm-hmm.
That said, with Tanner's assistance, we kind of quickly migrated on to leveraging the technology as we're doing today. So we had polls available that were online. We had shared cloud storage space where we were able to access documents. And we found, even before the pandemic, that was very useful. That, if you're too busy to jump in the car and drive 45 minutes to go to a meeting that's going to last 2 hours, most people can find the time to spend a few minutes at their home or their professional office location and do the same thing online. So that may be a useful strategy moving forward, especially as it regards to getting input from the various working groups and steering committee meetings in this planning process.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's something that we've been starting to think about, the best way to work with you all and with the work groups on developing goals and objectives, and without having to put a bunch of new meetings on people's calendars, how we strategically use the time that we have and then the time in between with polls and opportunities for written input without putting too much stress and pressure on people to be responding to those requests over and over. And I think working with Tanner on some of those behind the scenes administrative organizing, reorganizing aspects that he was talking about earlier might help limit the amount of time that people have to spend providing input, but also make sure that the plan is still coming from all of your experiences and your ideas and your language, even to make sure that we have that buy-in for everything from the high level goals for the whole collaborative all the way down to the objectives and the action plans that will help put it into play for each of the work groups.
Ashley, just two quick observations I'll make. I think when you asked this original question of how is work done, it is primarily or vastly done at the work group level. So aside from Mark, Georgia, and myself, the steering committee here might not know that answer as well. And that is something we'll want to talk about and try to find a way to address through this strategic planning process, is how to keep the steering committee truly involved with the work, since they'll be, leading the work and approving what gets done and helping to guide it, but connecting them with what gets done on the ground. And the other thing that we'll talk about a lot, I think, moving forward is the more we can tie the work of the collaborative directly to the work that's already being done, I think that the greater success and long-term buy-in that we'll get from all of our partners. So we'll definitely be talking about that with the work groups as we move forward. But instead of bringing work to individuals to do, we say, what do you all want to do, and truly and collaboratively develop those, bring their work to the collaborative, and that's what the collaborative becomes as it fits within our mission, as opposed to trying to find time for new work on top of what they're already doing, which has a little bit, it's a little bit harder to use people's time that way because they have limited time and capacity for that. So those are my two observations there that I've seen.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Tanner. I think that second point is particularly important here, with hearing that there might be some concerns at the work group level of being able to have the capacity and time. And so how do we align our strategic planning with not only the goals of the collaborative, but also a realistic vision for work that the organizations, the partner organizations that are already involved in, have within their work plans and annual objectives and goals, and allow the partnership to support that work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Before we, oh, go ahead, Angie.
Or David, are you wanting to say something?
Yes, thank you. Let me lower my, I'll ask a question and then I'll lower my hand. I think one of the things is that I would like to get to is understanding how the steering committee can actually steer. Mm-hmm. So there must be some real magic going on, because when I've been to the other meetings, it does seem like, the chairs are reporting. It's really wonderful to hear the chairs reporting. And hopefully the work groups will continue to grow. I always come back to the question is, what can we do together that we can't do alone? And if we invest some time, will it free up our time? For me, an alliance works, a collaborative works when if I'm investing something, it's taking something off my shoulders. I just wanted to put that in there.
Thanks, David. That's yeah, really important. And sorry, didn't see your hand raised there.
And the other piece I just wanted to just note, when I hear the value of Tanner's role, a coordinator role in this, and how that's helping us work well, it's like, we're gonna have to think about that in strategic planning and staffing the collaborative and raising money, because we're recognizing as an organization, like, there is we can always do more if we have the time and money, right? So the time and money piece for the coordination support is something that I'm responsible to keep an eye to.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. That is good to highlight, and because part of the strategic plan will also involve that funding and funding mechanisms aspect. If that needs to, if Tanner's role specifically needs to be taken into consideration, and everyone is in the different groups are reliant on that facilitation, and that has been working, and they want it to continue working like that, that has to be a priority. Great. Okay, I think we can just spend a few minutes here. Anything that you've already been kind of thinking about, percolating on, with where we could be we're talking 5, 10, 20 years in the future, what demographic changes, population, climate changes, the availability of funds, what external changes could impact what we should be thinking about and prioritizing in a 5-year plan. So it's not that those changes will necessarily impact us within the 5-year plan, but we need to take baby steps, incremental steps towards making sure that we're keeping a lens on that and how it could change priorities in the future, since ideally our strategic plan is that continuous process where we are taking steps now to then build on in the future. So headed in a direction to keep these things in mind. So are there elements that have come up in the past or that we should be considering for the region?
Well, certainly population growth is significant. It's been significant over the past 20 years, and I don't see why it wouldn't continue to be a significant driver of change over the next 20. That coupled with the fact that Jefferson County has weak zoning, Berkeley County doesn't have any zoning at all, and it's not likely to adopt zoning anytime soon, I think would feed into that, that equation as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know it seems like the development population growth, that a lot of that has been baked into goals and plans so far. So it would just be continuing with that work. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, that's,
yeah.
Yep.
Great.
This is Barbara. There may be some subtle influences that we're seeing now that could impact what the next 20 years would look like. And maybe I'm being a little negative here, but with our experience with the epidemic, COVID, with the fact that executive folks, people are finding that working in a different way, it doesn't require a person to go to an office building. Maybe the pace of land development may change in some way that we didn't expect a year ago or 3 years ago. The trajectory of development may slow down. It is one thing. I don't know if the appreciation for zoning will increase, but it might. So maybe we need to kind of tinker a little bit with what we think the next 20 years would look like.
Yeah, and I think that also brings up a good point, Barbara, in what we're seeing today, what we're seeing a year or 3 years from now for these impacts and influences can change. And so our plan, we'll want the strategic plan to be adaptive to those changes outside of a 5-year kind of review period. Because if we set the plan now with what we're seeing right now and then wait 5 years to reevaluate, it could be, we could have been either not taking advantage of incorporating changes and new trajectories, new projections, or we could be a little behind the ball on new priorities.
The only quick thing I would add to that as well, Ashley, is just that it's something that we've talked about, and I don't think it's 20 years from now, but just in terms of where we talk about where we work and where we could be, the collaborative's geographic focus might also expand to another county to the west, over to Morgan County. It's several of our partners have asked that question. It's something we'll be exploring. So it's not necessarily a change. It's a change that we would be willingly looking into and choosing, but that would change our focus and where we're working. It would add a different population, different type of landscape, and et cetera.
Right, sure, and potentially change the appetite and the amount of support and that you need in order to continue with the work that you've been doing and take on this additional geographic area.
Correct.
This is Georgia. I think the other thing is looking, and in the next 5 years, we may see changes in land and water federal policies and wildlife policies. And that would impact what we're doing and how we're doing. We've got, an administration possible change coming up, and we don't know how that's going to impact the federal environmental policies, which then impact our local policies.
Right. Great point. I'm gonna, just keeping an eye on time here, I'm gonna move us along so that we can get to discussing our structure and approach for the strategic planning. This is just a quick update for any of you who haven't had a chance to look through the plan and skills survey input or attended the webinars that presented some of the outcomes. These are some of the kind of key terms that came up repeatedly throughout the survey input about what collaborative members would like to see the plan include and what it should be. And so these came from both reviewing a few existing plans to see the kind of balance between content and schedule and design, as well as elements of the plan to include. So a lot of these, we saw a lot of reference to goals, the mission and vision, objectives that get you to your goals, and then strategies or action plans that can get you to accomplish the objectives, funding strategies, measures of success. So that kind of metrics and how do you tell if you've been headed in the right direction, if you've been successful, if there should be adjustments made. And then the suggestions for improvement were actually from the skills survey, but I wanted to put them in here because I think they may influence the strategic planning effort because it looked like two of the more common feedback. There was more collaboration across the work groups and communication through the agencies, which came up today when we were going through introductions to, and then combining efforts with other projects when possible. Also getting at what Tanner and others were talking about in terms of not duplicating efforts, not creating new work that can't be taken on, but figuring out how to create more comprehensive projects that can be supported by work that's already being done or that is already being supported in different ways by different groups. How can the collaborative bring that together and, to David's point, take some responsibility off of individuals or individual organizations and put it under the collaborative umbrella. So with that all in mind, and kind of having the survey input, our discussion around what's working, how it's working, and goals and objectives, we have two strategic plan format options that we wanted to present to you all today. The first one is that we have our combined vision and our combined mission. And then because the work is being predominantly done in individual work groups, the intention here would be to have each work group develop their own goals and objectives, keeping in mind that we have those 3 high-level goals that go across the collaborative. And so there would probably have to be some collaboration, coordination between the work groups on those goals, and whether we stick with those, there are adjustments to those. But when it comes to our kind of 5-year plans and objectives, that those would be driven by each of the work groups, and they would be developing goals and then objectives to meet those goals and action plans to accomplish those objectives within their work group streams. This approach is similar to the School Action Network plan, which I think has been shared in the past and discussed. So this type of approach, we would end up with kind of an intro to the strategic plan that talks about the mission and the vision more broadly. A lot of the information that's currently included in the operations plan could probably be adapted. And then when we get to the actual, if we're talking about a 5-year strategic plan and 1-year objectives or 1-year action plans, those would be driven at the work group level. The other strategic plan format option is to have our shared vision, our shared mission, and shared goals and objectives. And this would require each of the work groups to be collaborating and coordinating with one another to develop goals and objectives that likely will cross work groups. So this approach may or may not work with the way that work has already been done within the work groups, the way that they're currently structured and the way that projects get completed. But my understanding is that the work group sort of came from the work. There was work and it was organized into these categories, and so the work groups were developed in order to address that work in those categories. So if we were to go with this option, it may require more structural changes to how the collaborative is currently working and functioning and how work gets done. So instead of work being done predominantly by individual work groups, you may end up with work being done by project teams that are made up of members from different work groups. So we just put together a quick pros and cons based on our understanding of the way that work has been done and what's working well and what could be improved upon. So a pro of the first option, which is each work group having their own goals and objectives, is that the work group specific goals and objectives align with the current structure. The strategic plan elements could be integrated into work plan meetings, and using some of those technologies for getting written input, running polls, things like that could be done at the work group level, which is just a little bit of a more manageable size of people to reach consensus and discussion. And then the action plans would be more easily implemented by the existing work groups. So continuing to conduct work predominantly the way that it's been so far. Cons of that first option are that with separate goals and objectives, it could lead to siloed efforts, and there has been input recently that we want to increase collaboration within the group and between partners. And the collaborative already has avenues for communication and collaboration across work groups, but they were implemented, some of them, like the newsletter, was implemented pretty recently. So determining if that's enough to improve collaboration and communication between groups is a little bit still to be seen. Another potential con is that integrating strategic plan discussions into existing work group meetings may draw attention away from current work. That's going to be a challenge, really, in any option that we go through. Either we'll have potentially competing priorities within the groups, or we'll have to schedule additional meetings, which people may not have the capacity to take on to talk about strategic planning separate from the current work. The pros of option 2 are that we have co-created goals and objectives, and so that ultimately bakes collaboration and consensus in because of that process. It's a little bit of a messier process to go through across all of the groups, and with everybody reaching consensus on goals and objectives. And the goals and objectives would be consistent throughout all of the plans, so we would all be working towards the same goals. Objectives could be set on an annual basis, and so each work group would be conducting action plans to reach an element of those objectives. But there would have to be a lot more coordination and collaboration across the groups. It's challenging to build consensus in that large of a group, especially when we have different work groups whose lens or focus is on a particular element. Work groups may draft goals for other work groups. If we're conducting discussions and we're working on strategic plans in our existing meetings, then there could be a really great idea that comes up, but it may not relate to that particular work group. So it could be hard to get buy-in and commitment for goals and objectives that the people who are actually implementing it didn't develop. And then this last bullet is just what I mentioned before, that based on how it sounds like the collaborative is currently structured and conducts work and meets quarterly in work groups, that we may need to do some restructuring on how work gets completed, which isn't wrong, and it can be part of this process, but it is something to just keep in mind and be aware of, that approach may not align with how work is currently being done, which may make it more of that additional work kind of feel, instead of being able to have a framework that supports how the work's already being done. So for our next steps, this is just we'll openly discuss the approach and the structure for the plan. We might not get to reaching consensus during this meeting, so we can deal with that offline if we don't. And then we'll move forward with scheduling for September. So initial thoughts on the options, and I can go back up to the organizational structures of the pros and cons.
I kind of favor option 1 more than option 2. It seems to be, right now, it's had some very good outcomes and works well. I don't know if changing the structure would make it work better or not. That would remain to be seen. But I kind of favor that. And more specifically for goals and objectives, under option 1, they can be more specific and you would get more buy-in that way, rather than in option 2, having common goals and objectives become more generalized, and the buy-in may be weaker, difficult to come by.
Great, thanks for your input, Barbara. Does anyone else agree or have another perspective they want to share?
Yeah, this is Mark Chavon. I would respectfully disagree and be moved more toward option 2, in large part because I think option 1 reads as being relatively rigid and having these work groups as entities that may be permanent over the next 5 years, and I don't see that as being the way that this collaborative will evolve. And I could be wrong, but my impression is that the conservation working group had the heavy lifting at the beginning as we developed the metrics to identify properties, and now the heavy workload has been pushed over or handed over to the education and outreach group. And there will be a time in the next couple of years when that effort slacks off a bit and the workload pushes over to stewardship committee. So I think by elevating the goals and putting them across the enterprise rather than focusing them in these silos, that we're going to end up with a more flexible plan that allows us to, at the low level, change the makeup of these work groups without really affecting the structure of the plan. Again, we are planning for where we're going to be in, I guess, 5 years is the horizon.
This is Georgia. And thinking in my mind, I thought of some similar things to what Barbara and Mark just talked about. And I'm leaning towards option 2. And again, option 1 is very comfortable for me right now, but option 2 is where I think is where we are going to be leaning towards and working towards as we're working towards our 5 years plan. And the longer I stay in my comfort zone in option 1, the harder it's going to be to move as we grow. And I think the points that Mark just brought up, where we're shifting, and we will, from the work that gets done in the different groups. And if we are not all working from the same goals and objectives, then that shifting of work is going to be really hard. And I think that keeps us in those silos, and that keeps us from communicating. And then that becomes a separate issue that we're always continuing to fight for, as opposed to doing that kind of upfront hard work right now of developing those common goals and objectives, which that I see that was listed as a con, but I don't see that as a con really, but more an issue that allows us to pull us together to work on those common goals and objectives. And it really is an opportunity for us to bring those silos together earlier rather than later. So again, I see option 2 as being the best for us.
Okay.
But I understand Barbara's points, and I think those are valid points as well.
And we may be able, I'm just noticing the time, we're about a minute over. I'm not sure if we've lost anyone yet. But we may be able to sort of have a collective goals and objectives approach, like what we have for option 2, but with keeping in mind that the work, at least for the next year, is going to be done at the work group, going to be continued to be done at least to some extent at the work group level, to set that, 1-year action plans or something like that, to get more at the specificity, because I think that's what we may struggle with the combined approach, is how do you get to those metrics and measurements for specific success in the first couple of years and then further out, with the higher level goals and objectives. But again, I completely agree with you, Georgia. I think a lot of the cons for both options are more challenges, challenges to implementation, or challenges to developing the plan that we just need to be cognizant of and plan for. All right, we're about 2 minutes over. Does anyone have anything anything that they were waiting to jump in on? And sorry if I missed anybody in the attendee with their hand up. I'm not seeing that for some reason.
This is Barbara again. I'll just say that I really fully appreciate what Mark and Georgia said, and I could amend my comments by saying that I would be in support of anything that would, we wouldn't have to maintain a rigid consistency if the work and the mission demands that we collaborate in a different way. So in growth, and we don't have to remain consistent if growth is going to help it with the outcomes better.
Yeah,
better outcomes.
And that's something with the strategic planning process, as well as the actual plan implementation, that Renee and I've talked to Tanner about too. Making sure that we have that ability to adapt within the planning process and make changes if, as we're starting to put together action plans, we reassess a goal or an objective, and then to allow you all to have that same flexibility when you're actually starting to do the work, to revisit and say, this really isn't a priority anymore, or we have already accomplished this earlier than we thought. What's the next step? To have that continuous improvement and opportunity for review, to build that into the process and into your plan, so that you have a mechanism to do that.
Ashley, in this idea, is it that the steering committee will be a kind of strategic planning committee?
I think the plan for today's meeting was to present this information to you all first, and see if we could have this dialogue around options come together with either one of these options or a hybrid option that we'll present to the whole collaborative in September. And then to have the steering committee act as the sort of guidance advisors, to be included in decisions as they're being made, depending on the approach that we take, whether that's as each work group develops their goals and objectives, then reviewing that you agree with those goals and objectives for that work group, and sort of a review, kind of bookending the process for setting goals and objectives, developing action plans, and then the final draft strategic plan. So I think I just want to be cognizant of time. We're about 5 minutes over now. I think we have had a really great discussion and good input here. Is there anything else anyone wants to make sure we capture before we take this information and try to take a second shot at maybe a hybrid approach between options 1 and 2 to address the concerns that came up with both options?
The only thing
I think,
go ahead, Mark, please.
I think a hybrid approach makes even more sense. That way, if you're going to do the standard kind of 1, 3, and 5 year approach, the approximate milestones would be based mainly on the the goals of the individual work groups, and as we move into a longer planning cycle, a horizon, it becomes more a set of goals of the organization. So I'm perfectly fine with that.
Great.
And what I was going to add to that, just when it comes to to wrapping up in the next steps, like Ashley mentioned, we are going to want to do a collaborative gathering as we've been doing in March and September of each year. We did one in September of last year when we had first formed all these work groups in the steering committee. It would be a time to take what we've talked about today and subsequent conversations that we'll have with Ashley and kind of present our process and a meeting timeline so everyone can see what those meetings will look like. It'll dive in more to some of the questions David was asking of what is specifically the role of the steering committee, how many times will we need to meet as a group, or how would we weigh in as we go. So what I can see is two things. First, to this group, we can send out a doodle poll for scheduling a time, probably in late August or early September, for having that collaborative gathering, just to get your all's availability first, and we'll schedule that meeting. And then my only question would be is for that meeting, do you all want to weigh in as a body on kind of that hybrid approach, or did you want, based off of today's conversation, Ashley, to kind of put together, based on what we heard, that hybrid approach that we would present to the full group? Do you all want to see that and weigh in on it before we meet again in late August or September? Or do you want Ashley just to take this recording and put that together based off of what we heard from everyone today? We want to give the steering committee as much opportunities to weigh in without weighing you down. We want you to truly have that opportunity to steer, as David asked, without burdening you all with too much of these things.
So is your question, Tanner, whether we would like to see what will be presented to a meeting of the whole before a decision is made on what to present?
Mm-hmm.
I would like that opportunity. I mean, you can always just say, you got 3 days to look at this thing, and, make time if you want to.
I think that's great. If you all are comfortable with that, we can, again, West Virginia Rivers can assist Ashley with summing all of this up, putting together that hybrid approach, and getting that out to you all to kind of review and make any final changes, and then we'll present it to because once we present to the steering, or to the full collaborative, yes, there will be some flexibility with how things go, but it will be something that we would want to try to stick to, just because we do have a time frame for when this ends. So Ashley, does that work for you? We'll do the doodle poll first to figure out when that meeting will be, and then we'll kind of work over the next week or two to pull this conversation together and present back to the steering committee. Here's what the option would be that sounds best, and in the time frame for meeting schedules. Does that work for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's great, because we just to reiterate what both Tanner and Renee have said, we really should be kicking off our goals and objectives, whether they're widespread or specific to work groups or both, really right after that meeting in September, to be able to have them settled upon and everybody to have agreed on those well before we hit kind of the holiday period, so that we can get action plans developed and the strategic plan fully hashed out and built before June.
Sounds good.
Great, then we'll work on that. Tanner, anything else
That's
to close out?
everything. Thank you all, steering committee, for your time today. There'll be lots more opportunities and discussions to talk on this, and thanks for the extra 10 minutes of your time.
See ya.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.